More moves are incoming after Heat Insider reveals the Miami Heat's next moves. I'll break down how Duncan Robinson is going to be at the focal point of this offseason until moved or otherwise. We'll break down the interesting situation that the Miami Heat and Duncan Robinson find themselves in on this episode of Heat Digest. But first, please do remember to stop, scroll down, and click that subscribe button, as nearly 80% of you guys watching this video are not currently subscribed. We do appreciate the love and support, so thank you guys. But now let's get to it and break down what to do with Duncan Robinson. Now, it's a very interesting conversation because of a few reasons. And we're going to start with the fact that obviously Duncan has been a part of this Miami Heat organization for the last 7-8 years, and he has maintained the same role ever since he was drafted up until today. He is a lethal spot-up shooter who can flat out, if he does catch fire, will not miss for days. And I mean that literally. We've seen him go on streaks where game after game after game, it feels like he is throwing rocks in the ocean and he's standing on the beach. The guy cannot miss. But outside of that, defensively, you're not getting a lot from Duncan Robinson. The ability to facilitate is not his greatest. And again, he is a subpar rebounder at the shooting/small forward position, averaging 2.5 rebounds a game as well as 2.5 assists per game in this past season. Now, his contract is really what the interesting piece is that we're going to focus on, which we're going to cite information from this article written by Anthony Chang, as he goes on to point out that Duncan Robinson has all the cards in his hands. It's totally up to him in this situation. A very different situation, as organizations usually don't find themselves without all of the control. And in this case, Duncan Robinson, as the player, has all of the cards in all of his control. Anthony Chang would go on to say, but there is one contract option that is out of the Heat's control. Instead, a three-point shooting forward, Duncan Robinson, is the one with a decision to make before Sunday's deadline. Robinson has until Sunday at 5 p.m. to exercise the early termination option in his contract for next season. No formal decision has been made yet on the option as of Saturday morning, according to a league source. By exercising the early termination option, Robinson would immediately become an unrestricted free agent, and his $19.9 million salary for his up-and-coming season would come off the Heat's books. This would be the best case scenario for the Miami Heat, unless they were able to package Duncan Robinson in a trade elsewhere to another organization where they wouldn't have to take up so much money, but possibly get back a few assets, maybe a young player on a small deal. Now, that is very, very unlikely, and names like Jonathan Kuminga, as well as others, have been in connections to a possible trade scenario involving Duncan Robinson, and I'm here to tell you it's going to be very, very difficult for that to be done. It's going to involve a bunch of teams, including the Warriors, the Miami Heat, and at least 1 to 2 other organizations in order to get that trade done because of, one, the lack of cap room that the Miami Heat maintain, as well as roster capacity, as after Sunday at 5 p.m., if Duncan does not opt out of this contract, the Miami Heat will be at 15 out of 15 open slots on their roster, filling it to its capacity. So there are a lot of moving parts, and it's going to be very interesting, as again, the Miami Heat organization, the professional organization here, regardless of the sport, does not have they don't have all the power in this situation, which is so interesting to see because it never happens, regardless of the sport. Now, Anthony would go on the right, but if Robinson simply allows Sunday's deadline to pass without exercising the early termination option, he would remain on the Heat's roster, and $9.9 million of his $19.9 million salary for next season would become guaranteed. So, going on, if Robinson bypasses the early termination option to guarantee a chunk of his salary for next season, he'd become the 15th player on the Heat's roster. So this is something we just mentioned earlier. If he opts in and does not opt out, that is 15 out of 15 on the player roster for this Miami Heat organization, which means the only way they would be able to go out there and acquire other assets, in the sense of player assets, they would either have to take a trade where it'd be 1-for-1 or 2-for-2, or they would have to be giving up more than they would be getting back. They would have to be at a deficit in the sense of assets going to compared to coming back, or they would have to cut players to then go out and sign other assets. A very interesting spot for this Miami Heat organization because there is so many different components, and again, they don't have all the control. Now, last main thing we're going to cite here as the final thing I do have is a quote about Jonathan Kuminga that we've basically broken down up to this point already. But in the scenario that Robinson doesn't exercise the early termination option in his contract, the Heat could free up $10 million by waiving him before the July 8th deadline to lower his cap hit from $19.9 million to $9.9 million and dip around $2 million under the luxury tax line. In addition, the Heat could trade Robinson before the July 8th guarantee date in order to avoid the full $19.9 million cap hit. So, two different pieces of information here. One of them we already really broke down in the idea that Miami could trade him before July 8th. I didn't have the date beforehand, but now I do. July 8th is the deadline if the Heat would like to trade Duncan Robinson or flat out cut him, basically waive him and get rid of the contract and save some of the money rather than him obviously opting in, and then he's then owed basically $20 million going forward. Now, if Miami would like to hold on to this asset, they're going to have to rework a contract because they don't have the luck. They don't have the money where they could bring him back at that 19.9 number. The Heat could also waive and stretch Robinson's contract ahead of the July 8th deadline, which would free up $16.6 million by lowering his cap hit from $19.9 million to $3.3 and get the Heat about $8 million below the luxury tax threshold. The downside of Miami is that this would spread the $3.3 million cap hit over the next 3 seasons instead of just having the cap hit come off the books following this up-and-coming season. Another option is that Robinson could exercise the early termination option in his contract and become an unrestricted free agent this summer. Robinson can then work with the Heat to return on a contract that would pay him his current $9.9 million guarantee next season with additional seasons of guaranteed money tacked on to keep him and also escape the luxury tax. If best case scenario, that exact scenario takes place. Duncan opts out, then there is another re-sign where he become an unrestricted free agent, and Miami and Duncan can work exclusively in getting a contract done where not only would he get the $9.9 million, but then they would be able to add years to a contract, and he could be a part of this Miami Heat organization and continue to be the lethal threat we have all watched and loved him to be over the last 7 to 8 years with this Heat organization. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. Obviously, we know how this Miami Heat roster contracts and all of the financials really look going forward over the next year and a half, 2 years, because of how much cap room they currently have available based off of the numbers that we've seen in the last month and a half, with that $33 million line sitting around in the sense of cap room available next offseason, depending on how they decide to spend money this offseason. Now, the last thing we already mentioned earlier, among the outside free agents who have been linked to the Heat by multiple reports is the Golden State Warriors forward Jonathan Kuminga, who will be a restricted free agent this summer. The Heat have some level of interest in Kuminga, but is currently exploring other potential moves. According to a league source, any move for Kuminga would almost definitely need to come through a sign and trade transaction since Miami doesn't have a cap space, and any team that acquires a player through a sign and trade is hard capped at the first apron of $195.9 million. There has been no free agent meeting set between the Heat and Kuminga yet. So again, like we mentioned earlier, Kuminga, the ability to get him for Duncan Robinson, it would involve a sign and trade. I don't believe contract-wise in the sense of finances and the money going back to Golden State would work, let alone the money coming back to Miami because of the new contract they would have to present to Jonathan Kuminga. There's a lot of moving parts here. I tried to break it down as best as I can by giving you guys the best information that we have currently found and that has been made available to us. And that is, again, this article that will be tagged down in the description if you'd like to read it yourself in its entirety. We really tried to break down the main pieces here that give us the best idea of what this is really going to look like and possibly could look like, as, again, there are multiple options. Again, Duncan could opt in, Duncan could opt out. If he opts out, he is an unrestricted free agent. If he opts in before the July 8th deadline, the Miami Heat are going to owe him X amount of money compared to why, and if the Miami Heat decide to waive him or trade him before that July 8th deadline, that would also lower the money that the guaranteed money that would be owed to him. And again, a lot of moving parts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys on the next episode.